Okay, we'll go ahead and get started now. Good morning. Hope everybody's had a great time here in Nashville. I'm, as the slide indicates, Dr. Gregory White. I am a faculty member in the Computer Science Department at the University of Texas at San Antonio. I'm also the director for a security center there. I'm not sure how many folks have heard about UTSA. We're a university that's not very old. We're less than 50 years old. But we, in that 50 years, have actually done a pretty good job of getting a reputation in the area of cybersecurity, computer security. Just a little bit, I'll give you the obligatory who the heck we are, since I'm supposed to advertise and let everybody know about it and spread the word about the excitement in UTSA. But one of the things about the UTSA that's different than a lot of universities in the country is that instead of just having, if you take a look at the Centers of Academic Excellence, the DHS, NSA designated Centers of Academic Excellence, oftentimes those are located in a single college, either College of Business, College of Engineering, College of Science, something like that. At UTSA, we actually have programs across all three of those colleges, and as a matter of fact, we're actually starting another program in the College of Liberal and Fine Arts, because there's actually, after all, there's policy issues, and so the public policy people want to get involved in this. So we have a very multidisciplinary program if you take a look at the program overall at UTSA. UTSA has had some recognition in the area of cybersecurity. A few years ago, the Ponemon Institute, HP paid for a study by the Ponemon Institute. They basically went out and asked people, who would you rank #1 undergraduate program in the country? Who would you rank #1? And so they didn't have any preconceived notion of who it was or a list that you were supposed to pick from. They just went out and asked people. And UTSA came out number one undergraduate program in the country. We're pretty proud of that. What we're really excited about is they haven't redone the study, so that means we're still #1 as far as we're concerned. You know, a couple of years later, a separate study was done on graduate research programs, and we came out #2 in that program, right behind Carnegie Mellon. And if you know anything about Carnegie Mellon, I'm okay being #2 to Carnegie Mellon, because that's a pretty good program there. It also meant that we're still ahead of folks like MIT, Purdue, Stanford, and a whole bunch of other folks who've got very good programs as well. So UTSA's done very well. We were first NSA designated Center of Academic Excellence, NSA DHS designated Center of Academic Excellence in Texas. We are one of only 20 cyber operations centers. We received Centers of Excellence. That's a smaller one. That's a harder one to get. And as a matter of fact, NSA said they're only going to limit that to about 30 at most schools in the country, and we're one of the 20 schools right now that had that designation. A lot harder. Our application for that was over 600 pages to get that. And then NSA came out to verify that we were doing indeed what it was that we said that we were doing. And they spoke to every instructor, made sure that they were covering the materials that NSA wanted to cover. So it's a hairy designation there. Just to know a little bit about the center that I'm involved in, there's actually 3 centers or institutes at UTSA that have a strong primary focus on security. There's the Institute for Cybersecurity, which, if you think about an institute or a center at a university, you know, that production of PhDs, 5, 10, 12-year out kind of research, dissertations that may sit on a shelf and never get looked at ever again. That traditional security institute or center, that's what the ICS does. We have a lot of PhD students being produced out of that. Dr. Ravi Sandhu, we stole him from George Mason a few years ago. If you know anything about role-based access control, he is Mr. Role-Based Access Control. Has been a very well-known figure in cybersecurity for years. He runs that. We have the Cyber Center for Security and Analytics, or our Cyber Center. They have kind of a dual focus there, but currently the majority of their work is still in the area of cybersecurity. They are more applied. They are out of the College of Business. Ravi's in the College of Science. The Cyber Center is in the College of Business, and they're more applied. They're looking at what are the kind of things that industry is having problems with. Do businesses have problems with now that maybe we could do some research on and come up with a solution or some help for you in the next 2 years. So it's that much closer applied research. Then there's the Center for Infrastructure Assurance and Security, or the CIAS, or the Security Center, and that's the center I'm the director for, and we have a very much an operational focus on security. What can I do to help you and your organization today? Not 2 years from now, not 10 years from now, today, what is needed. And so what can we be doing in that regard to that? And so that's why the topic that we're going to be talking about today is out of my center. We do, in my personal opinion also, the difference between the centers is there's something fun that's going on at UTSA, that's in the CIAS. We're doing that, and you'll see why I say that. Just a little bit about the CIAS, just to know what we're doing. We have a grassroots level program. We also run the security competitions program. In fact, I've got a team right now that should be coming back from Kuwait today, who just got finished doing competition in London, then they went over to Kuwait, were there for 2 weeks. They go to Indonesia later this year. They go around the country, or excuse me, the world, running security competitions. I don't know how many people have heard of the National Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. We have over 200 colleges and universities that participate in that annually. We ran that, I mean, we developed it and we continue to run that. Cyber Patriot is probably a better known one. That's the high school and middle school competition. They have over 6,000 schools that are participating in that. We just had a round of competition they just went through. We were one of the 4 founders for the Cyber Patriot. We have the fun part. Once again, there's that fun part aspect of CIAS. We do the technology. We're the technology piece behind Cyber Patriot, which means that the Air Force Association, who owns the program overall, they get to deal with high school and middle school parents and teachers and administration, and we don't have to deal with that. They get to deal with that. We don't. We get to stay, behind the scenes, just running the networks, running the competition, putting all the images together. We do that part. Interestingly enough, every year at the national championship for CCDC, we very rarely ever have anybody complain about anything in the competition. We've got this down pat. Very, very few. I mean, maybe once every 3 years we'll have someone who'll bring up an issue or something that they thought was an issue. Cyber Patriot, you can absolutely positively guarantee you're going to have all sorts of parents and coaches up there after the competition and during the competition. They are always complaining about everything. So let the Air Force Association run that. Panoply is an international competition. It's the kind of thing that we're doing right now overseas, and that's run slightly different format for that competition. We had DHS funding to do a international pilot this year, which we ran earlier in this fall, and we'll be now turning that into an international cybersecurity competition. Some other things we do professionally, and these are going to be important as we move along, and you're just sort of getting a feel for what it is that we do in the center. And like I said, that grassroots focus. We do a lot of professional training, professional cybersecurity training. We have right now 6 grants, just finishing up one, so it'll be 5 active grants with the Department of Homeland Security's, the FEMA side of DHS, developing cybersecurity training for states, locals, tribes, and territories. That's the wonderful buzz phrase there. We do certification, things like that too. This community cybersecurity maturity model, remember that Rubik's Cube, because we're going to be coming back to that a little bit later. So just get that picture in your mind there. We do a lot of incident detection and response and community. Notice the community appearing all over here. Information sharing and analysis. I assume everybody's heard of what an ISAC, or what the ISACs are. We're going to be talking about them in a few minutes as well. And then this whole culture of security program, which we are very into. So as we go along, let's start taking a look at some of the things that we want to discuss today. When you're out there, and I was talking to some folks on Saturday, as a matter of fact, here at this conference, talking to some people who will go out there and do security consulting work, and they were asking questions. We were talking about how do you convince people that there's an issue? There are so many, there's certain sectors that you can, so like the critical infrastructures, they pretty much starting to basically understand. Some of the critical infrastructures really have it, they really understand it. Some of the critical infrastructures are coming along, but by and large, you don't have to go out there and convince them that there's a problem. They know that there's a problem. But what about the rest of the world? The majority of this country, they're not part of one of those critical infrastructures, right? They're in their other areas in some way, shape, or form. And the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which is one of the traditional ways we security geeks have been trying to convince people, you have to have security or else this bad thing is going to happen to you. And we've got we see the figures, millions of dollars, the potential loss. There's what's the percentage of businesses that if the operations are interrupted for some reason, whether that be a natural disaster, whether that be cyber, what's the percentage of them that end up going out of business? We've got all those figures out there. But generally FUD, that fear, uncertainty, and doubt, doesn't really work all that well. People, if they're not already convinced of it, you're not going to convince them that way. They have all sorts of different excuses why they don't. They may believe that they're already secure. I've seen some examples of that. One good example of that are the states. The DHS every year puts out a national preparedness report. and it lists a whole bunch of different areas in emergency preparedness, and they go out and they ask the states, how prepared do you feel in each one of these areas? And then states give a response, and they've come out with this wonderful report. Since 2012, cybersecurity has been at the bottom of that list. The states do not feel prepared in cybersecurity. Most of those areas, if you take a look at 2012 and then compare it with today, they have gradually started to creep up. They're doing a little bit better. They're getting the education. They're becoming more prepared, so they feel better about themselves. Cybersecurity went down. If you took a look at the 2012 numbers and compare them with the last year's 2017 study, which came out last year, I haven't seen the 2018 yet. They've gone down. So why did cybersecurity go down? Did the states all of a sudden do something wrong? No, the states started to understand that they didn't understand cybersecurity, and that they finally understood that they are not prepared. And so for the last couple years, that figure, 13%. 13% of the states in the United States believe that states and territories believe that they are prepared to handle a cybersecurity event of some sort. So there's that. Yeah, I don't know how many times I've heard, talking to somebody, and this is especially true in industry, a lot of industry. Why would anybody want to attack me? I'm San Antonio's shoemakers. Why are they going to attack a shoe store, for heaven's sakes? You have all sorts of excuses, and then there's the, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no, just the turn a blind eye. So there's all sorts of reasons that this is true. We have to figure out a way to approach these people and talk to them and convince them that, you really need to think about cybersecurity, but it's not going to work with FUD. And so I have some thoughts on that we'll get to about how we're going to do that. We're going to take a little historical purview, or to look at cybersecurity for a second. And one comment too, I don't want to get caught up between the difference between computer security and cybersecurity. Generally today you hear everybody talk about cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a little bit broader than the computer security. For the purposes of my talk today, they're synonymous. It makes no difference. I don't care. Use whichever term you prefer, okay? What we were trying to do for many, many, many years, when I first got involved in cybersecurity in 1986. Up to that point, so the late 70s, early 80s, even back into the early 70s, what we were trying to do was we were trying to create a secure computer system. That was our goal, a provably secure computer system. And if I could produce that secure computer system, then I will have solved the security problem, minus communication, crypto type stuff. Ignoring that, putting that aside, if I can secure the computer, then bingo. Life is good, we will be there, nirvana in terms of computer security, right? The problem was we never seemed to get there. We haven't been able to arrive at that point where we had that provably secure computer system. We had this concept, does everybody here remember the Orange Book or know about the Orange Book? I still teach that, by the way, in my class. Because there's a lot of good data in the Orange Book. The Orange Book, by the way, is part of the quote-unquote Rainbow series that NSA put out a long time ago, called the Rainbow series because they had an Orange Book, they had a red book, they had a green book, you get the idea. And each one of those books covered a different topic. Orange Book was the basic one. It was the one on building a trusted computing system, basically, TCSEC. And then there was the red book, which was the trusted network interpretation. So how do I take the Orange Book and apply that to a network? And then there's all sorts of different colors. We can get into a long discussion about why nobody looks at the Orange Book other than academics these days, because like I said, there's a lot of good data. If you want to learn how to build a multi-level secure system and what should be required as part of a multi-level secure system, go back to the Orange Book, it's there. But they had this concept of a trusted computing base, and the idea was, and we started to see this at this point, when they started talking about trusted computing base, they were still looking for technology to solve the problem, but we recognized that there were levels of trust. And that's what the Orange Book did. It defined several different levels. If you're processing information that's classified secret and everybody on the system is cleared for secret, then I don't have to have as much trust in the operating system as if I have a system which has top secret information and uncleared users, and I have to keep those two separate for obvious reasons. So we had this concept of trusted computing base where some systems would be more trusted than others, right? You may have heard people use this. This is a traditional analogy that folks like, and I think they're misusing it. for the most part. And that's why I wanted to talk about the Maginot Line. And you hear people talk about, security is like the Maginot Line, right? And what we're talking about is that we had this thing and it doesn't work, and the Germans got around it, and it's just like computer security. Well, sort of. And I'll talk about what I mean by that here in a second. I think it's a great analogy if you word it correctly. First of all, does everybody know, okay, history lesson now, did everybody understand what the Maginot Line was? If not, basically it was fortifications between, France didn't want to have happen what happened in World War I to them begin in World War II. They didn't want the Germans coming zinging across the border with tanks and soldiers and all sorts of fun stuff. So they had this line of defenses built, is what it was. And there's an interesting line down here, that in most cases, the troops inside the Maginot Line didn't give up. They weren't bombed out. They weren't forced out. France eventually surrendered, and then the troops came out. Those fortifications, I don't know if anybody's ever seen a diagram, they were pretty darn extensive. They were pretty good. Take a look. You probably can't read it back here. We've got medium artillery, heavy artillery, more medium artillery, a 75-millimeter gun, mortar, machine guns, anti-tank on the one side. And so this would be, the German side, and this was obviously the French side. But there wasn't just this bunker area here. It extended out with more tank traps, anti-tank mines, machine gun placements, anti-aircraft, all this. It was pretty darn extensive. And the facilities in here were actually very nice for the troops. It was a good facility. And as we just saw in the previous paragraph talking about it, it wasn't until France surrendered that most of these folks came out of this. Why? Well, what did the Germans do? Here's the Maginot Line, right? And you can see the heavy red line. Here were, as it says, the strong fortifications. And then along the Belgian border, and with that small little area, Luxembourg, they had weak fortifications. So where did the Germans attack? There, where it was weak. They came zinging across the border. So what do we learn from this whole thing? The Germans did not attack the strongest point of defense. They found a weak area, and they exploited that. They didn't do a frontal assault where people expected them to go. They went around it. So did the Maginot Line work? Yes, it did exactly what it was supposed to do. The Germans did not come across the border where it had the heavy fortifications. They went around it. And that's what we're doing. And that's why I like that analogy with computer security. Because most of the times, the bad dudes and dudettes out there don't hit us right up front on our strongest point of defense. They find ways around it. So yeah, our firewall may just be perfect, but how well does our firewall protect us against the insider threat? Phishing attacks. May or may not. So there's a number of different ways that someone can attack us. They find the weak point and they use that. They don't attack the hard points. So so go ahead and keep on using that as an analogy, but use it correctly type thing. It worked. The Maginot Line worked. It just wasn't complete. It wasn't the complete defense. So the operational model, back in the early days, basically what we were doing is we had protection. We wanted to protect our computer systems, and protection equaled prevention. And that's what we focused our time and our energy, our money on. We were going to build that provably secure operating system. We were going to harden that system down to where people couldn't get through. That was the protection equals prevention. And it was based on the technology. Bottom line, what eventually happened is we had a realization that, and this occurred about in the mid-'80s, that wasn't really the best way to approach things because people would find ways around that. I find it, as an aside, I find it rather humorous at some level. You have to laugh because otherwise, you beat your head against the wall too often. But all the uproar in the media about the Russians and what the Russians have been doing in terms of attempting to break into, however you want to look at it, the critical infrastructures in this country, or playing around with our election systems, or anything along those lines. Folks, I hate to break it to you, but I got involved, like I said, in 1986. The Air Force decided in its infinite wisdom that they needed to make a security officer out of me because I knew nothing at all about security at the time. So they're going to put me in that job. At that time, the Russians, then Soviet Union, they were taking us to the cleaners in terms of cybersecurity. They were breaking into systems back then. So they have been doing it longer than I have been involved in cybersecurity, and I've been involved since '86. So is it a big surprise that the Russians are doing things today? No. It shouldn't be. But this is the kind of state that we're in. This is like back to the problem of how do I convince folks that they need to worry about cybersecurity? You know, they've got the blinders on and they don't realize that we, the American people, don't understand that this has been going on for years, people. This isn't something new in the last 3 years. This has been going on for years. They've been doing it, for heaven's sakes. Okay, enough of that. So the resulting model, what we came up with, and this was actually pioneered in the Air Force originally, was that if I wanted to protect my systems, I can't just rely on prevention, because prevention is going to fail. For a variety of reasons, prevention is going to fail, if that's the only thing that we look at. So we have to be able to be ready to detect when that prevention fails, and then to respond to it. Now, these terms are not new to anybody, because we've been talking about this for a number of years now. But you know, like I said, the historical perspective, this started back in the 80s, is when we started to take a look at that. Now, why are we not going to be successful? Why do we have to worry about, why can't we just prevent? Well, you know, the traditional new vulnerabilities that are found. How often do we have to apply a patch to software? Too often is a good way, that's an excellent way to put it. But, you know, all too often we have to apply a patch of some sort. You know, we've got security issues, new 0 days, exploits and vulnerabilities. You know, we have all these kind of things happen constantly. New technology, you know, oh, I should be on the next one here. It talks about this. We have new holes and things. We have new technology. Okay, back when I separated from the Air Force originally, I went to work for a company and we were doing some telephone modems. Modem security is what we were doing. Back then, and this is not even 2 decades ago or something, you know, when you bought a computer, you bought a laptop, it had a what? It had a connection for your telephone. When was the last time anybody here bought a laptop and it had a telephone modem connection on it? It has not, they don't exist anymore. You'd be hard pressed to find one of those puppies, right? So what do they come with today? Well, we have wireless. Well, back then at that time, we didn't have wireless. What about when I'm teaching computer security now versus when I taught it at the Air Force Academy back in the late 90s, we didn't have this thing called the cloud. But now we have cloud security, we have wireless, we have all sorts. Every time you add a new technology, you got to take a look at the security application, and there's potentially holes as a result of it. Anytime I take two organizations and trying to bring them together in some sort, there's potentially a crack in there somewhere. So there's a number of different reasons why prevention is not sufficient. And so that's why this whole operational model is important. Users, and we'll talk about them a little while. You can't trust the users. Well, I guess you can. I take that back. I can trust the users to do the wrong thing. That's what I can trust the users to do. You know, and misconfigurations and poor policies and things like that. Secure by default is not necessarily the norm. It should be, but it's not necessarily the norm. Folks, everybody's seen this. Check it out here. Everybody understand and know about and looked at and seen the NIST cybersecurity framework. You know, is it okay? I'm getting mostly nods here. This is a wonderful little picture. And if you notice, look at this. Great. Protect, detect, respond. There's that operational model we were talking about in the mid-'80s. It's included in here. Now, interestingly enough, if you take a look at what identify and recover meant, when we were first pioneering that operational, recover was actually part of the response, and identify was protect. Because you're going to protect something, what are you going to protect? You have to know what it is going to protect. So we had included that. But NIST has broken those out because those are important enough and separate enough issue from the protect and from respond that they need to be handled by themselves. They need to be addressed by themselves. So this is the new NIST cybersecurity framework. It's not that new, I guess several years old now. Right, and there's the issues. Here's the identify that they added. We're basically just trying to identify what are your assets? What are the important things that you need to protect? Because coming down here, and when you get to the protect, it says ensure delivery of critical services. Well, what are your critical services? You got to identify them. So that's the identify part. And then they separated recover, because response is an interesting process unto itself, all by itself. But then I have to be able to recover. And so that means business continuity plans and disaster recovery plans and all those kind of fun things that are there. If you haven't seen the NIST cybersecurity framework, here's just a little slice of it. So here's my 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's my 5. Oh, I probably ought to use this so I don't keep on walking in front of that. So here's my 5 functions: the identify, protect, detect, response. and recover. And for each one of those, I have a number of different categories. So for example, identify, I've got 6 different categories of things that apply to identify. And then for each one of those, I have subcategories. So here for the second one, business environment, I've got another 5 subcategories. And then for each one of these things, I've got a number of informative references. And this is the power, this is a real power of the cybersecurity framework. Because if you, as a security geek, need to know something about the organization's role in the supply chain is identified and communicated, here are some references. Are you playing around with ISO? Are you doing NIST special publications? It's great. Lot of good information here in this NIST cybersecurity framework. It's a big document because you can imagine I've got 5 functions. I have multiple categories for each one. I have multiple subcategories for each one. There's a lot of info in the NIST cybersecurity framework. And we also have this concept of tiers. Now, I've highlighted a few areas because we're going to come back and talk about some of these things. But tiers, and here's an important thing, tiers do not necessarily represent maturity levels. So it's not something, not everything has to be at a tier 4. The important thing is you're going to identify what it is that your organization needs. And what parts of your organization, especially for a large organization, what parts of your organization need to be at different tiers, there are different levels, if you will. Right, so we're going to do that. And you have some definitions here, and so here's partial, and basically we read the first statement. Practices are not formalized. Basically it means that this is where everybody starts at generally. I don't got anything formalized. And down here, 2 aspects that we're going to hit a little bit later. The organization doesn't have any kind of idea about who it's dependent on or who may be dependent on it. And they ain't sharing information with anybody. They're not talking to anybody else in their sector or not in their sector. There's just no information sharing going on there. Okay, here's the risk informed. Practices are approved by the higher level management, but they may not be established yet. So we've at least got the management understanding that we need to have something, but we may not have got it going yet. And down here, the organization understands its role in the larger picture of things, in the ecosystem, with respect to who it's dependent on, but it may not understand who's dependent on it yet. And then it's beginning to collaborate a little bit. And then that just keeps on going. And you can watch this. You can see where we're advancing, if you will, in the maturity levels, or not the tiers, not the maturity levels. Down here, I've underlined it. They may contribute. They're not required to. They may contribute to these other ones. And they're beginning to definitely do a little more information sharing. And here, they definitely understand their picture, who they're dependent on, who's dependent on them. They help people. They're sharing information up and down the chain and all that kind of fun stuff. So there's my adaptive. The other thing that the cybersecurity framework has, and I like this, and you notice the little arrows pointing to it, a roadmap. Because ultimately, if you go to an organization, they don't care about all this thing philosophically. They want to know what? What do I got to do? What's step 1? What do you want me to do first? What am I supposed to do second? And so a roadmap is what is really critical. And this profile concept is what you're doing is you're establishing profiles, and you have different profiles for different parts of the organization, where you get to define what is important for this portion of the organization, what is important for this part of the organization. And that, in theory, then will help you, lead you to this development of a roadmap, so that you can plan on how to get to where it is that you want to get for each part of the organization. And like I said, given the complexity, they may have multiple profiles for the organization itself. So great. Sounds like a great document, doesn't it? It's got all this great stuff. The problem is the NIST cybersecurity framework has a lot of great information, and that's exactly the problem. It has a lot of great information. And you hand that to someone, you go up to especially a small and medium-sized business or a community, a local government or something like that somewhere, and you say, oh, cybersecurity, all you got to do is follow the NIST cybersecurity framework. Well, yeah. Where do I start with that? How do I get going? You hand that document with all these different things to some small and medium-sized business who may or may not even have a cybersecurity person. They may have some IT people who double, because that's their additional duty. Where do they start? How do you get started? It's not intuitively obvious where the answer to that question. No problem, no fear. NIST has got another document for you small businesses out there. We're going to help you, is what they're saying basically. We've got this Small Business Information Security, the Fundamentals document. And if you take a look at what they've got in the fundamentals, they've got this wonderful piece of pie, and one piece of the pie is cybersecurity. And they've got other things that you need to be concerned with, which, you talk to I'm sure any of your clients, they need to be considering these things, absolutely, whether it be physical security, privacy, all these other stuff, personnel security. So they've got this document that's going to help you. So you don't have to necessarily turn to the NIST cybersecurity framework, because that's confusing. We're going to help you with this. And this has a number of different guidelines in it, which will help you work your way through it. And it's good. It's got some good steps. And here's some steps that they have. You take a look at managing your risks, section 2.2. Here's some of the steps that they define. Identify what information your business stores and uses. So we're trying to, you wanted that. We wanted that. What am I supposed to do? I want the roadmap. Here's your first step. There you go. Identify what information your business stores and uses, right? And then determine what's the value of these things in terms of several different things. In terms of the public, what happens if this information gets changed, corrupted, right? What will that mean to your organization? And what happens if you can't access it? Either you or your clients, your customers can't access for a while. So that helps you determine what's the critical information. So I've defined what information I have, I figure out what's critical to my operation, and then I can sit here and develop an inventory for what touches each one of those pieces of information that are considered critical. Then they get to this thing that I've highlighted in red down here. Understand your threats and vulnerabilities. That's great. And it's, and by the way, is this going to convince my skeptics that don't believe that this is a cybersecurity problem? I still haven't convinced them to even take step one here at this point. But here's a statement right out of that thing where it says, you should regularly review what threats and vulnerabilities your business may face, et cetera, et cetera. How do you know that? Where does that information come from? How does an average small and medium-sized business out there know what the threats and vulnerabilities are to them?
We tell them.
Okay, and now we're back to the, do I really have to worry about that, kind of issues? But yes, there's a lot of guidance in there where they suddenly come to the, and then wave the magic wand, and then some other magic stuff happens, and then we get to, securing the system. How many organizations have that ability? I'll give you a wonderful example. The very first project I was assigned to work with in the Air Force way back when was a risk assessment, automated risk assessment tool. It's called ATAM. Everybody heard of ATAM? No, because nobody uses it. But it was a great tool. We could model all sorts of things with this. We had Arthur D. Little folks up in Boston area that helped us build this wonderful, wonderful tool. I went around the Air Force teaching people how to use this tool. How do you input stuff? And where it fell apart was it got to that point. And when it starts talking about the likelihood, what is the probability that this will happen? What is, how likely is this to happen? And we still have that problem when we start talking about risk assessments today, don't we? We have quantitative, we have qualitative, and we have people that prefer one or the other. But at bottom line, it gets down to how do you know what the numbers are? Now, we are starting to get some data, thanks to, for those who were here earlier, we talked on insurance. As the insurance industry gets going here, we know the insurance companies can figure out how much my premium should cost for my car insurance, right? Because they've got a lot of data. We don't have a lot of data yet in the cyber side, and so you have these phenomenal figures. And then the other thing about cyber, as was pointed out earlier, I may have a $5 million policy, but if I get hit with some big data breach, my expenses may be $500 million. And who's going to how much is a $500 million policy going to cost? Because we've seen those kind of breaches, right? It's interesting. So anyway, probability is kind of an issue. Let's take another look at some of the things that we've done in the CCS, or the CIAS, and explain where we are at and what we believe is going on and happening, what we should be doing. We've conducted, since 2002, we've conducted a boatload of cybersecurity exercises in communities and states around the country. Originally, it was the Department of Defense that paid for it, and also training that went with that. It was DOD that provided some funding. The terminology that was used was we were supposed to go to communities in which there was a significant DOD presence. Okay, makes sense. And what we were doing was we were showing the military installation in that community that if the bad dudes do that, if we wanted to impact the ability of the military installation, whether they're Army, Navy, Air Force, it was primarily Air Force since it was the Air Force funding it, but if I wanted to impact the ability of the military to conduct its mission, do I attack the military, which one might argue is the harder target cybersecurity-wise, or what can I do by attacking the community, which one could very easily argue is the softer underbelly? And we showed how easy it was to impact the operations in the military by attacking the community. And the communities are exceedingly simple to attack. I can bring down 911 in any community in the country. Easy, fast. It's not hard at all. Anybody can do it. You know, that proverbial high school hacker that we always hear about. You know, you don't even have to be a good one, and you can do that. Very, very easy to do that. When we conducted these exercises, we said, we do not want IT people. Leave your IT people home. Your IT people already understand that there's a problem. They've probably been asking for money for years. We want the mayor, city managers, chief of police, head of the EOC, you know, those kind of folks. And we were actually very successful at getting them. We had governors that showed up at our state level exercises. Really, really, really good. These was awareness, wake them up type exercises, what we were trying to do here. Give you a little example of some of the stuff that we did. Here's an exercise from back in 2006. We're going somewhere with this, by the way. This is not just bragging on UTS. We got a point I'm going to make. In 2006, we conducted a state exercise for the state of Texas. It consisted of a state cell in Austin, and then we had 3 other communities defined by, the state picked those 3 other communities, and we were running concurrent cybersecurity exercises in the state and in all those communities. So each one of those communities, I had people in, and they were running an exercise. So here is an example of, this is actually one of the injects that we had. This was up in Tyler, Texas, which is in northeastern, more or less, portion of the state, east of Dallas there. And we tell you basically what's going on here. You know, it's a possible war driving. So we got this white pickup truck that's going around this one area, over and over and around this area, right? And a police officer sees him, this truck circling this one block. And people haven't done anything. Nothing illegal's been done at this point. They're just circling the block. So the police officer could be just doing something, being nice. Hey, I noticed you're just driving around. Are you lost? Are you trying to find something? Can I help you? You know, it just stops them to help. But as he stops them, he notices this funny little antenna and this little computer on the front seat. Now today, I mean back then, the question was, would the police officer, would the law enforcement officer understand the significance of this? You know, that there's potential war driving going on. Today, what do I need to do war driving? I got a war driver on my cell phone. So it's going to be a lot harder I couldn't run this inject today because you don't need all this fancy equipment here, just my cell phone. You know, but that said, the question we asked would your law enforcement officer understand the significance of this? That this is possible war driving here, or probable war driving. Would they understand the significance of war driving around this specific block that this person, what was in that block? Was it a critical infrastructure? Was it a government organization of some sort? Was it a major industry, you know, banking, financial institution? What was in that block? Because that might be important to know, right? And then we asked the question, would you share this information with anybody? Other communities, the state, whatever. And what the answer we got back, especially on that last one, was, you have got to be kidding me. If we shared every little thing that was going on in the communities with the state would be inundated with stuff, be information overload. There's no way that they want it or that we're going to provide it to them. We said, okay, that's actually a valid response. That's true, you betcha. So, okay, thank you very much, Tyler. Meanwhile, in Dallas, we had this incident occur. Now, if you notice, exercise timeline, this was on Friday. And then this was on Saturday. We see something very similar. And then a little bit later on Saturday, actually timing here is the same, but the point is could have been a little bit later. We saw this in Plano, Texas, all communities near Dallas. We said, nobody shared any kind of information with anybody else on this because it was the same reason. You know, we don't share things like that, for heaven's sakes. You know, and so we said, okay, great. So during the hot wash, brought up a nice little map of the state of Texas. And we said, here's the picture. Let us paint this picture for you. So on Friday, we saw something going on about here. My star's slightly off there. And then on Saturday, maybe we had 2 other, maybe 3 communities that had something similar going on. And then on Monday, maybe we had several others that had something going on. We said, now, folks, are you interested in it? And the answer was yes! Because this is what? This is an indication of something is up. Something is going on here. How do you know that? How will you ever get to this site picture if you don't share? That was our question to them. And it was kind of like, point taken at that point. Interestingly enough, another question we asked was, okay, what happened on Sunday? Were my hackers going out, and my war drivers, were they going to church, so they didn't do anything that day? Or are there some other community somewhere that we don't even know about at that point? No? Interesting. So anyway, that was kind of information sharing. Here's another little thing, interesting. I had a PhD student a few years ago who was doing some work on community incident detection and response, and he needed some data. To run some experiments with some playing around with some software that he was playing around with. But the city of San Antonio wouldn't let us scarf up the data off their network, and the variety of networks in San Antonio. So he created, we all know what a honeypot and a honey net is, right? A fake file or system and a fake network that you just sit there and it's designed to be observed by people to see what the bad dudes and dudettes are doing out there. We created a honey community. So it's a fake community. There is no such thing as Roadrunner Park. Roadrunners, by the way, is UTSA. That's our little mascot, Roadrunners. And so the premise behind this, if you went and looked on the site, it talked about the history of Roadrunner Park. It's predominantly individuals who work at or serve UTSA in some way, shape, or form, and that's who's in the community. So it had a nice little storyline. But he also had the ability to go out there and pay your utility bills online if you wanted to. You could go to the police department. You had a number of different sectors that were represented here. And then we got this all built. He did a great job. He went out and looked at a number of different small communities in the state of Texas and mimicked their websites. He did a great job. So then we sat back and we opened this up and we said, okay, let's see what happens. And we left it up, connected to the internet for a few days. Then we took it back down and he had the data that he needed. And then later on, what we're going to show on the next slide here, was not part of his dissertation. It was actually an aside, but it's some interesting results that we hadn't really thought about until we started playing around with it. Now, first of all, where were the top hits coming from? Russia and China. Big surprise to anybody, right? Russia and China were the top two. Brazil, interestingly enough, was number 3. That's where the attacks were coming from. Now, what we have here, this is kind of just interesting stuff here, but this is the very important one here. We had, after an analysis and taking a look at Snort and tweaking it and playing around with it and looking at other things and doing correlation and doing all the kind of study that he needed to do to analyze what was going on in the network, there were no doubt about it, just over 3,000 attacks that we could identify. These were people mucking around. Remembering that there is no such thing as Roadrunner Park, so potentially anybody touching it is someone who might be trying to attack it in some way, shape. And that's not totally 100%, because there could people just have wandered across it. But the majority of folks touching it were doing something that they probably shouldn't have been doing. We had 1,400 of those 3,000 that were an attack on a single sector. From what we could observe, they were banging away on, for example, trying to gain access to the e-commerce portion, not commerce as such, but paying the bills, utility bills. Maybe attacking that. There was 151 on 2 sectors and so on and so forth. The interesting, important number that we came up with, which was just totally out of the blue, we hadn't thought about it, this wasn't the purpose, is the asterisks up here. And with the asterisks, and if you notice there's 1,400 of those, so almost half of the 3,000 were attacks in which they were across on multiple sectors, but they would not have been identified by any single sector if you were looking at just that single sector. It's below the threshold. Now, what are we talking about by that? And there's something here, a simple example. If I have how often do you fat finger your user ID password combination? I know in UTSA I do it at least twice a day because we got this 46,000 long character password that we have to have now. And I get flying. And you know what? Autocorrect doesn't work on passwords. And so I am going to constantly type. I rely on autocorrect for everything else, but I can't rely on it with a password, and I'll constantly make mistakes. Will your system alert on a single failed password attempt? No, it's not going to happen. Right? That's noise, that's weed. It happens too often, especially as we keep on getting these long, complex passwords. It's going to happen multiple times a day. Great. Now, if I see, however, I take a step back, remember my Texas example, taking a step back, and I see a specific password user ID combination attempted here and failed, and then I see it on his system, and then I see it on his, and you get the idea where we're going with it. That's what we're talking about. It would have been under the threshold for any one of those sectors. But when we look at it across the sectors, we see something going on. So if you're sharing information, you have a chance of potentially getting to that point. If you're not sharing, how am I ever going to find almost half of the attacks on that community? How am I going to get to that point? Now, by the way, I am not minimizing the information overload issue by any stretch of the imagination. That is a real challenge in this arena. It is going to remain a challenge for a while. But my question still remains, how am I ever going to get that site picture if I'm not doing the information sharing? Now, based on this research that we've done, we took a step back. One of the problems that we found with the exercises was that when we conducted an exercise, the nice thing about a cybersecurity exercise is it's going to be a success. I guarantee it. First time everybody is involved in one, they learn something. So everybody comes away having learned something, it's a success. It's nice to be part of a program where every time you do it, it's a success. And it was. And so, we'd be shaking hands with the mayor and slapping everybody on the back, and everybody's doing well, and thank you very much for being here. And then we would go on to the next community, wherever that was, and we'd do it again. We eventually got DHS money, and the DHS money allowed us to go to a state, and then the state would pick a couple communities, and then we had a series of exercises we ran, including a state exercise, like we did in the state of Texas. The problem was we came back a year later and talked to some of these folks and say, so how's cybersecurity going in your community? And the answer was, we don't know what to do. There are more vendors and that are willing to sell products and services than you could shake a stick at, but these folks don't know where to start. That roadmap term that we were talking about before didn't exist. They didn't know where to start. And the other thing about communities, they don't have a lot of money. Unless they programmed for this a couple years ago, there's no money right now to put against this new problem that you just pointed out to me. There's no money for it. So we took a step back and we created this thing called that Rubik's Cube that I showed you earlier. The Community Cybersecurity Maturity Model, which is designed to serve a couple things. It's a yardstick to measure an organization's posture. It's a roadmap to show you how you get from point A to point B, or level 1 to level 2. And it serves as a common point of reference. This wasn't an original intent, but we found that it became that, because now San Francisco and San Diego and Boston, when people come together, we now are all, hey, I'm at level 2 of that model and information sharing piece, and what did you do? You have a common point of reference to talk about your cybersecurity programs. This became actually the model that's used by this entity called the National Cybersecurity Preparedness Consortium. That's a group of 5 universities producing training for states, locals, tribes, and territories. We have got a number of different courses. By the way, the nice thing about these things, free. The government has paid for the production of these things, and a number of these, about half of them, are online courses. So you can go into a community somewhere, and these are free resources that you can let people know about. Got a number of different ones of these. Okay, now, another thing that has occurred. The information sharing and analysis centers. You know about the ISACs. Those originally were created for what? The different critical infrastructures, right? Back in 2015, President Obama issued this presidential executive order, and it basically said, great, folks, we got the sectors covered, the critical infrastructures covered, but the majority of the country is not part of those critical infrastructures. We need someone to be the standards organization for the development of standards, guidelines, and all those kind of documents to produce what he referred to as information sharing and analysis organizations, ISAOs instead of ISACs. Interestingly enough, UTSA we won the grant to do that, so we are the standards organization for these ISAOs. But here's the critical piece and what's pertinent here as far as I'm concerned. Notice I swiped this from an early DHS from our program manager, one of the first things that, he had this briefing that he used to give. And I said, I want a copy of that slide. And they said, approximately 16 sectors. I think the National Council of ISACs, I think, now has 21 ISACs, if I recall correctly. So anyway, 21 or 16 or whatever the number is of ISACs to, look at that, thousands of potential ISOWs. And we have to have an ecosystem that can handle thousands of information sharing organizations. Now, how the heck are we going to have thousands? Why would we ever have thousands? Glad you asked. One of my favorite ones, you can't read it there, is this one right here. And this is the fake one. This is fictional. It doesn't exist yet. But before I retire, I'm going to make sure it does. It's the South Texas Mariachi Band ISOW. Now, that's what happens every time I mention this. I get a lot of chuckles. But let's think about that for a second. Do mariachi bands have a website? Yeah, go to San Antonio and look up mariachi band. You'll find a number of different ones, and they have websites. Do they collect credit card information? Sure, they do. Would they benefit by knowing something about cybersecurity as a group? Sure. Do they need a 24/7 security operations center? Probably not. But would they benefit by just coming together as a group and sharing information on security as it pertains to its members and to themselves? So, for example, hey, I heard about this thing called ransomware. You guys heard about that? What am I supposed to be doing about that? That kind of level. That's still what? That's still information sharing at the level needed by the individuals or the organizations. That's why it's thousands of potential information sharing organizations. Because you can have them that informal. Do I need to be having a membership fee to be part of that? No, there doesn't need to be a membership fee. It's an informal group coming together, but they're going to be part of the ecosystem, the larger ecosystem. And we'll talk about that in a second. Another one of my favorite ones is this one, the West Coast Cannabis Growers. Is this a group that may have to worry about organized crime or other entities playing around with it or trying to muck around with it? Sure. Is this a group that inherently trusts the government? Nope. Are they going to want to share with the government? No. So do you need to be sharing with the government to be part of this ecosystem? Absolutely not. Do you need to be sharing with anybody else in the ecosystem? Don't have to if you don't want to, if it doesn't benefit your organization. So this ecosystem, as it's built, has to take into account my little South Texas mariachi band, who may want to share, but they don't have much to share with anybody. It has to worry about the West Coast cannabis growers, who don't want to share with anybody. And it may, we have, one of the ISOs we have right now is National Credit Union ISO. Now there's a financial services ISAC that we probably all know about, huge. The financial services ISAC is one of the better ISACs. The problem with it was that the number of credit unions didn't feel like their needs, specific needs, and they're slightly different than the traditional bank, right? The credit unions are not the same. They didn't feel like their needs were being met. And so they broke off. They didn't break off. They're still members of the Financial Services ISAC because that's a very powerful, very good organization they want to be, to still be in contact with. But they created their credit union ISAC to talk about the issues that are pertinent to credit unions. And so they're part of the ecosystem. Now they do share with the government. They do share with each other. They're willing to share with other people. This is what's going on. So that's my ecosystem. The publications, these are all freely available if anybody's interested in it. You can go out there and go to the ISOW.org and all the guidelines, the documents, everything that's being produced for the ISOWs and how to start an ISOW and all that kind of fun stuff is freely available. It's free, 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 free. Then we have this issue. This, by the way, was a picture that I took. I was at a conference and I had the pen upside down. I wish I had the pen right side up because that would have been CIS, there. But what I was covering there is actually the password. I was trying to be nice. This was a person that was sitting next to me at the conference who got up and went off to the bathroom or whatever and left the computer there, and there's the password, the user ID and the password which I'm covering up, the little yellow sticky. My students, I tell my students about the yellow stickies and they go, oh, come on, Dr. White, nobody does that, do they? Yes, they do. Remember all this little hubbub that was the furor going around about North Korea and potentially trying to nuke Hawaii, earlier this year? Well, they had, whoops, get back to that wrong button. They had an interview with some folks at the Emergency Operations Center out in Hawaii, which is really actually a pretty good facility. I've been there. We've done they were one of the ones we did a security exercise for a few years back. They took a picture of the individual they were interviewing. Well, someone noticed right here in the background this little yellow sticky sticking on a monitor. They blew it up, and there it is, password. So yes, it happens. People have the little yellow stickies. What are you going to do? This gets back to the, okay, I can have that. I can play with the protection, and by doing prevention, you know, and building secure operating systems. But when you got that going on, you know, how are you going to deal with it? Next one, issue. And what about these things? We've all seen them, you know. How often have we seen a breach, a major breach that occurred, and it was a result of someone doing something, going someplace they shouldn't have, or clicking on something they shouldn't have? It happens all the time, does it not? We all have probably also read about the number of cybersecurity jobs that are going to be open, that will be available, right? We have I've seen numbers anywhere from a few 100,000 to 3 million, I think was the largest one, of openings that will not be filled by like 2022. These are vacant positions that we don't have people to fill them. Big numbers worldwide, you know. We could turn everybody at UTSA into a cybersecurity. We have about 10% of the students right now at UTSA, who are just over 10%, who are cybersecurity in one of those different areas. We have 30,000 students at the university currently. I could change every one of those people into a cybersecurity geek, and we still would not reach the numbers that we need, you know, if those numbers are right. So you hear a lot of people talking about a cybersecurity workforce and a workforce development and the need to increase our workforce and do something and get more cybersecurity professionals. This is Greg White's prediction. It ain't going to help all that much. Well, it'll help, obviously. The more security geeks we have, the better off we'll be. But unless we also address cybersecurity in the workforce, we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to get to where we need to go. We're not going to get the professionals that we need, so what are we going to do? And the thought here is, you talk to the American Ad Council, and they'll tell you that there's a 90% penetration, just over 90%. I can go up to the average US citizen on the street and show that picture and ask, who is this and what's the slogan associated with this image? And depending on how this is one of those things you can tell how old a person is, because they've changed the slogan. Back when I was a young whippersnapper and I learned it's only you can prevent forest fires. But back a few years, because of all the wildfires that were going on out west, it was changed to only you can prevent wildfires. So, you know, depending on your age, you'll remember one or the other one there. But I learned when I was growing up that there was something that I could do. I had a responsibility to prevent wildfires, and there was something I could do, right? McGruff, not as great a penetration, it's in the 80 percentile range. So 80% of the people can tell you what McGruff is. Actually, a couple different slogans, you know, they take a bite out of crime, but there's also the whole DARE program associated with McGruff. So not quite as great a percentage, but once again, there was something I grew up and I learned that, you know, I could do. So I have a responsibility. There's something I can do to help take a bite out of crime, right? To help prevent wildfires. Where's the cyber equivalent that's telling me or my kids that they have a responsibility and there's something that they can do to help prevent cyber wildfires, or to take a bite out of cyber crime? Yes, sir.
Haven't we been kind of lulled into thinking we're protected because we buy software that's on our computer to protect it?
The question was, haven't we been lulled into basically a false sense of security here, because we have a firewall, and now Windows operating system comes with the firewall. You don't have to even do anything, it's just push the button type thing. Yes, the short answer to that is yes, absolutely. The general public absolutely has been lulled into some sort of sense of security that probably they shouldn't have been. I told my folks in the CIS, I said, and we're working on the intellectual property now. We have something. We're working on the design, the diagram. So I want a character that I can get a costume for, and I can put someone in, and I can have them march up and down the parade on the 4th of July, so that we can start addressing the cybersecurity in the workforce issue. So I can get out there and address the folks and say, you're not safe unless you have a certain level. And what we're trying to do is, I learned about, you know, there's certain things I need to do. I grew up understanding that I needed to lock, you know, my parents taught me to lock the house when I leave, right? This little physical security. And so I took that with me when I went to work. I understood I have to lock my office. Where's the person telling me to lock my terminal when I get up from it? My mom didn't tell me that. You know, ethics. What about ethics? Where do we learn our ethics from? Where do we get them from? Well, it's our family, right, that raises us. Give you an example. My mom taught me that when I go over to someone's house, if I'm sitting there on their couch and there's a coffee table in front of me and there's a letter that they have that's open on that coffee table, that it's not polite for me to pick up that letter and read it unless they have given me permission to read it. It's not polite to read somebody else's mail. My mom never told me to not read someone else's email. You know, and where are kids getting their ethics that they're going to survive with or have on the internet? Where are they getting those from? Where are they learning them? We don't have that culture of security. We don't have the Berenstain Bears-like books that mom and dad can read to me, or older brother and sister can read to younger brother and sister. And each one of those books, right, Berenstain Bears or the Mercy Mayer ones, you know, all those books have a moral to the story, don't they? There's some sort of lesson that you're learning in them. And so we use these books and we're, you know, helping our kids understand things by these. There's not a whole series of cyber ones. They're beginning to be. Actually, the Air Force Association has one called Sarah the Cyber Hero that they published. I've got one coming out here this fall that's Hacking's Not a Game. That it's not a bear family, it's a moose family instead of a bear family. But basically it's designed to provide a book that a parent can read at basically that Berenstain Bear level, that they could read, that talks about the ramifications of someone hacking into systems and what could happen if that happens. How that can affect someone else doing that can affect you. And you know what? It's not fun. Because the moose family had a rotten day because of some people doing some stuff. You know, and then they learned about hacking's not a game. You know. So anyway, we need that kind of thing. Now back to the whole thing. Oh, good grief, how much time do I have? This is cool. This is really good. If we're going to try to do cybersecurity and to get it into the lower ages and things like that, we have created the Cyber Threat Defender, the collectible card game. And it is really popular. And it works really well. Let me just give you a little feel for, because there's a lot of games out there. You can go out and find, just go do a search on, you know, security games or something, electronic security games. You can find a lot of computer-based cybersecurity games, and they are horrible, absolutely horrible. They're written mostly by cybersecurity geeks who know nothing at all about gaming, and so there's a lot of problems with them. They're not replayable. You know, or they're not actually teaching a lesson. You know, you can win the game without ever having learned anything about cybersecurity. There's some problems with these games. So we said, okay, we're going to go about it. And we're going to change this. We created this Cyber Threat Defender and a collectible. How many people have ever played a collectible card game of some sort? Because this genre is important to understand the genre, why this is the right thing. Things like Magic the Gathering. This is patterned after. If you have a kid that's played Magic the Gathering, they can pick this up in 2 minutes. You know, and understand how to play the game. Now, to master the game takes more time. But here we go. So everybody starts off with an ISP connection and a desktop computer. And so you have those two cards, you have it. So every time we go around, you know, we all have that, and we're going to be gaining a point. Now, I want to get to a certain number. It's 30 is normally the number that we play to. I'm going to try to get to 30 first. So you get a point, you get a point, you get a point, I get a point. We all get a point, you know, every time. So I want to win, so that means I got to get more points faster than you could get those points. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit there and I'm going to go ahead and oh look, I got a wireless router card. So I'm going to throw that wireless router card down, and the wireless router card allows me to throw out some more, you know, to build my network, make my network more powerful. So now I can start adding things like laptops to this. And so now I've got 2 points. I'm getting 2, you're still 1, 1, 1. You know, you folks are, you're going to lose at this rate because I'm getting a point extra every round. But he notices that, he's got wireless router there, but you know what? It's not encrypted. So he throws down that wireless sniffing card on top of that. And now, there's a 2 on there. I'm losing 2 points. So I'm down to 0, and you folks are all getting 1. Until I get my encryption card out and I encrypt that communication. But think about now what the student has learned. They don't know anything about, you know, public key versus private key encryption. They don't know anything about, you know, key size or anything along this line. But what they have learned by playing this is that if I've got a wireless router and I'm not using something called encryption on it, then I am susceptible to a specific type of attack. That's the lesson that they walk away with. They're going to learn. By playing the game, they will be learning something about cybersecurity. And we have given out, and then they have specialized cards, like Cyber Patriot one. We have given out thousands of these decks. And I say given out because we're not trying to sell them to students. Yeah, you can go to the UTSA bookstore if you want to get like a single deck or 2 decks or something. But what we want to do is send boxes of these things to school districts and to schools, and we've done that around the country, and give them these cards. And we have teachers around the country that are using this to introduce cybersecurity in their classroom. The problem is it's still expensive, and someone, we have to find sponsors to pay for, 500 decks or 50 decks or 10 decks or however many they want to pay for to allow us to give them to people. So what we did is said, this is too slow. It costs too much money to do that. So we created Cyber Threat Defender PC, which is free for download. And it's basically the same game. And we actually have a lot of teachers using this. We just released this fall. We have a lot of teachers using this instead of the card decks because there's some benefits to the cards, but anyway, another cool thing. So how do we help things get started? Our argument, here's my basic argument, why I've been spending a lot of time on communities and stuff like that and what needs to be done. If you want to get to all those people who are doing this, it's going to be hard unless there can be some sort of environment in the community with their neighbors and other businesses and so on and so forth that they can learn that cybersecurity is something important to them. Give you an example of that. The city of Hearst. Most of you probably never heard of the city of Hearst. You heard of Dallas-Fort Worth. And Hearst is one of the many communities that sits in between Dallas and Fort Worth. On the north side, slightly closer to Fort Worth. City of Hearst had a cybersecurity day. And what they did is in the morning, they had a bunch of speakers. We went up there and spoke. And in the morning, they had talks that were designed to address the critical infrastructures in the community, the government, the city government. In the afternoon, they invited businesses, the businesses in the community of Hearst, the city of Hearst, to come. And then the talks were now about what you need to, as a business, businesses need to know about it. And then in the evening, there was a session for the general public and what they need to do. It's trying to establish that, once again, that culture of security within a community. Addressing, it's not just the mayor and the city manager and the critical infrastructures, it's the industry, it's the businesses, it's the ma and pa shops. Security is important to all of them. But how am I going to convince those folks? Back to my FUD factor, I've got to get if I have a community, and what we're seeing is when we have a community entity that is working on that to help promote cyber throughout the community, it's easier to convince the ma and pa shops there's something they need to do, especially if I don't go up to them immediately and tell them that they have to spend this amount, these tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars on cybersecurity. There's some simple things you can do to get started. And that's what I would encourage folks like yourselves to start talking to people about in the communities. You don't have to be part of a 24 security operations center. You don't have to go out and hire security threat analysts. You don't have to go out and hire 14 different security professionals like that. There's some easy things that you can do to start and to start your program. And so that's what we're doing. And we've actually created this entity called the Geographically Based Community ISAL. And we're helping communities form their own ISALs. And we're using the ISAL as a catalyst in the communities to start cybersecurity programs. That's what we're doing. And that cybersecurity program includes all those things that we just talked about. Includes getting them to make sure that they have Cyber Patriot in all the high school and middle schools. They're doing that. They've got card games or they download the games for free, that they got cybersecurity being taught to the kids. That we have, the character, which is still, the problem is I'm not announcing this because we don't want, until we get the intellectual property locked down, I don't want my character suddenly appearing on a porn site somewhere. And something like that will happen. Someone will abuse the character in some way, shape, or form. So we're not doing it until we got the trademark all locked up. So we're doing this, trying to get the communities involved so that we can bring in the small and medium-sized businesses especially. Okay, that's what we're trying to do. Now we had, so what does this all mean to you? Now we just at the talk, for those of you who were here earlier this morning for the previous talk, we had a nice discussion about insurance and how this all applies. I'm not a lawyer. I have actually testified in trials for the defense side of things, interestingly enough, which immediately makes you a pariah towards the prosecution ever, if you ever testified before the defense, but that's beside the point. If I were involved in if some company had done something and lost my data and I was part of a lawsuit, one of the first things I'm going to ask them is, are you following industry best practices? That's what I would be encouraging the lawyers to ask. Have you followed industry best practice? Now, you may be in a sector that has defined them. Some of the sectors, there's regulations, there's government regulatory things that you must be doing, so it's easy to define them there. But what about for the majority of the country that doesn't necessarily have those governing regulations? Where is the NIST cybersecurity framework going to play into that? If this is the NIST, remember what NIST is, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. If there's a government standards organization that is promoting a certain thing, the cybersecurity framework or the small business one, and you're not following that, I'm not a lawyer, but is there a potential for that to be used against you? Absolutely. So, we've just talked about how hard it is to do that. Back to that model that we've got, that's what we're doing. In fact, I'm going from here, I go back to San Antonio, change bags, and I head to Baltimore to speak at the NIST Risk Management Conference, where I'm talking about this specific topic, about rolling the NIST cybersecurity framework and their document on small businesses into something like the maturity model that we have. Because you still have the problem of, what do you do first? What do you do second? How do I get started? People don't have time to try to read that whole document and try to figure it out on their own. They're going to need consultants to help them come in. Hopefully the consultants have a plan that they can rely on to how to get through this, so that we're meeting some of those things. And you're not going to be able to meet all of that stuff right away because there's a boatload of things in there, but you can at least show where you're paying some due diligence to this whole thing, and you're trying to get started. You're trying to do these things. We're doing the following. This is the guidance that's out there. Here's the model. Here's what we're following. We're working on it. You get the idea. Anyway, there are some other wonderful little things. That's what the business best. We just talked about that. Some tools. There's some tools that you can get out there. These are all off, for example, on the NIST site has a whole bunch of links out there for some things that you can go out and get for free on assessment tools and some other things like that, and guidance and stuff. That was for the SLTTs, the states, locals, tribes, and territories. They have another section on small and medium-sized businesses, and then they have just some assessment and auditing resources. Now, unfortunately, if you go out there and start looking for those things, you will find that about a quarter of those links are broken. I was just out there checking on a few, and they're broken, unfortunately. You have to go searching a little bit harder to find the silly things. But the point here is that there are documents out there that are free for downloading that you can use and you can provide to various, whether you're working with a government, whether you're working with a small and medium-sized business, whoever it is you're working with, that can provide some additional guidance and help and so on and so forth for them. Now, I'm getting buzzed here. In the remaining 2 minutes, we got 2 minutes. Are there any questions on this whole thing? We've gone down a whole lot of different paths here, but it's been a lot of fun. Do we have a mic somewhere type?
On Hawaii, we were teaching in the malls and teaching in the libraries and getting that community thing going using Stay Safe Online, but I didn't know anything about that deck. So there's a gap in. We had a great opportunity. We had a lot of kids. But I didn't know about that deck. That's a great tool for teaching the kids and stuff. I just didn't know about it. So yeah. I don't know if we're not, Stay Safe Online is not, you're not using that, I don't know, there's a lack of connection there somehow between what you're doing.
There's a big lack of connection where we're trying to get out there. And I'll ask a question. How many people have heard of the Stop, Think, Connect program? Yeah. That's actually probably more than I've ever seen in a group when I've asked, percentage-wise. Stop, Think, Connect is a program that your tax-paying dollars have been paying for years. It's been going on for at least 5 or 6 years. And the majority, and we're in a group here of folks interested in cybersecurity, and most of you have not heard of that program. We're failing. I'll get more pointed. DHS is failing in that arena, and that's why we decided we're not going to wait for DHS. We're just going to start something ourselves, and we're going to go out. And we're going out to communities. We're going to go ahead and try to promulgate this information.
Is that training that you showed, is that on HSNI? The trainings that you were showing?
Yeah, basically it's through the FEMA side of things, and that's free. Now, some of those courses are classroom courses, and DHS is basically paid for the different entities to go pay for that. Now you have to go through your state, normally your Homeland Security rep in the state, to request those courses to get there. So there's a process.
We're starting to get some of it going, but I'm just amazed there's a lot going on here that's not, I just didn't know about. We need better sharing or better,
I wholeheartedly agree. So, yeah, just yeah, we've actually got 3 other electronic games that we've developed, including one, a real nice one I think on a crypto that I really like. That's fun.
Alan Powell with his Cybersecurity stuff?
Alan Powell. Oh, I know. Yeah, we know Alan. Way back in the early days of the competition program that he was trying to put together, we were supposed to be one of the partners of that, and Cyber Patriot was supposed to be a partner on that, and we both got shoved aside, shall we just say? Let me just put it that way. So yeah, no, Alan's got his program that he's proud of and he's promoting, and he's got a lot of money behind it, and more power to him. But he doesn't play well with others. We've seen some data. I'd also invite you to, basically the question he was asking and talking about Alan Poller and his the CyberStar program and the data for that. Some other good data that you can get on the effectiveness of some of these things is Cyber Patriot has some reports that you can download from Cyber Patriot on the effectiveness of that program overall. So and they're very effective. So anyway, I've been told to cut, so I'll be around.
Thank you.